My name is Arden Hopkin. I'm doing a voice general session this day. We're in warm and balmy Niagara Falls, and we are looking forward to a wonderful convention. I'll try to do my part to make sure that the convention is a success. As you all know, part of the responsibilities of a caller is to do more than call, but to sing. And yet it's all in the way that you say the word more than anything, because you are a person who uses your voice. You're a professional voice user. And as a professional voice user, you need to find ways in which you can make...
Hello? Hello?
And so along the way, I wanted to talk about some general principles having to do with voice, whether you are a singer or you are a public speaker, a school teacher, or otherwise. And to start our conversation, I want to just point to the words that I've written on the board. The voice is made up of 3 different systems, and believe it or not, this is one way in which men and women are the same. There are precious few of those things, but this is one where we're all the same. We all have an activator or a power source. We all have a vibrator or our voice box.
Test, 1, 2.
And we all have...
It's going to be hard for us to tell whether we're talking into the mic.
Our mouth, the place where our brains used to be, those spaces where we can get extra sound out of to enhance the sound that we've got. There's been a lot of practical experience that's been developed over the course of the last 400 years about voice usage. It's most of it been developed by people who are singers, and particularly in the kind of classical or operatic kind of vein, because those are the people that are sort of like the big athletes, the big vocal athletes. There are different kinds of athleticism, however, and a caller has to exhibit a different kind of athleticism from an opera singer. You may not know this about those people, but they normally only work about, when they're working, they only work about 3 days a week. And in one respect, they're a little bit like the stars of the baseball team, the pitchers. You don't ask a pitcher to pitch every day. They usually have 2 or 3 days rest in between, because they work their bodies, particularly the kind of their shoulders and their legs and so forth. They work them really hard, and it takes a few days for the voice to recover, or the muscles to recover. And that's the way it is with opera singers. They work really hard, and so they have days off in between where they don't do anything except eat. And that's the way it is with opera singers. They work really hard, and so they have days off in between where they don't do anything except eat. And that explains why opera singers look like the way they do. But having said that, there are other kinds of athleticism that are vocal as well. And you exhibit the kind of singing that has longevity associated with it, that has stamina associated with it. An opera singer, even though they may be in a long production that may last 4 or 5 hours in the night, they won't, any one of them, sing more than about 50 or 60 minutes of that total time. The really long operatic roles last maybe an hour and 10 or an hour and 20 minutes at the most. Well, that's easy for y'all. You guys are busy with your voices 4, 5, sometimes 6 days a week, and at 3 to 4 hour increments. And so that's a different kind of athleticism that has more to do with stamina than it does with power. You also use electronic amplification, and as the result of that, the actual pressure on your voice is much lower. But you still have that issue of longevity. And so let's talk about these different parts of your body. The activators are your lungs and the muscles that control your breathing system. And you have to have the ability to breathe air in, and you have to have the ability to breathe air out. Let me show you some exercises that you can use that will help to breathe air in. Now, all of you have lived all of the years that you have, because on some rudimentary level you have this skill down pat, right? But there are some ways that you can breathe more efficiently. Many of us, because of the way that we sit around all day, don't use our breathing muscles properly. We sit in a casual posture. And as the result of that casual posture, the muscles that ought to activate our breathing don't. And the primary muscle is the diaphragm. The diaphragm is a bowl-shaped muscle, bowed. It looks a little bit like an upside-down bowl, a little bit like an upside-down ashtray, as a matter of fact, because the front part of it doesn't go all the way down to touch the ground. If you had a bowl and you turned it upside down, it would be even all the way around. And in this particular upside-down bowl, the front part of it is kind of cut away to match the shape of our rib cage. The diaphragm attaches to the inside of your rib cage, and it goes all the way around the body, and it divides the lungs, the chest cavity from the abdominal cavity. It creates a seal in the upper part of the body where there's a kind of a controlled environment where the only way in is through the mouth and the nose and down through the throat. So lots of people don't use their diaphragms as well as they should. And so here's an exercise that you can do to strengthen your diaphragm and to find it and to cultivate it. If you'll just imagine inhaling through a little straw, you'll get the sense of what I'm talking about. Just and let it out, and then do it again. And you keep doing that while I talk. You'll notice that when you do this little drill that I'm talking to you about, that you'll feel a little tug right around the bottom of your rib cage. That's the activity of your diaphragm. The diaphragm has muscle fibers in it, and when those muscle fibers contract, when they flex, they contract. The diaphragm flattens out in your body, and that's one of the means whereby you bring your breath into your body. So if you were wanting to improve your ability to take in air, you would do this little drill that I just gave to you, and you'd do it in increments of 10 repetitions at a time. And you'd do probably 4 or 5 sets of 10 repetitions. So 40 or 50 of these repetitions spread over the course of the day will help you to become more capable in getting breath into your body quickly. You really don't have to suck air in. I'm actually making you purse your lips on for a reason, and that is you don't know where the diaphragm is, but when I make you work the diaphragm harder than normal, when I make an obstacle in the way, then it draws attention to itself. And that's a really good teaching tool, that when you don't know where something is, you make it work harder than it should, and all of a sudden it'll let you know where it is. So that's a way that you can do that. You can just get to the point where the diaphragm is used to being flexed more vigorously than in casual breathing. The next thing that you can do is this is now through your nostrils. Inhale through your nostrils until you have a comfortably full tank of air. Now let it settle for a second. You get to start over. I'll start again. She let it all out. Okay, so take in through your nostrils. Feel comfortably full. Now take in a little bit more. Let it settle. Take in a little bit more. Let it settle. Take a little more. And let it out. Well, what happens is that there are little ligaments between each of your ribs. And when you breathe in more than you think you should, those ligaments will stretch, and you'll find the capability to take in more breath than you thought you normally would be able to. That's just a means whereby you can increase your capacity if you should happen to need it. In your lungs, there is a certain amount of air that sort of goes back and forth in and out. That's kind of called your tidal breath. That's what we normally live on. Sometimes that's the breath that we speak with, because we don't speak for long, extended periods of time. And sometimes when we're singing, we have to tap into more than just that tidal breath. And so if you have a greater capacity, then you have a greater amount of breath that's available to you for use. Even when you exhaust yourselves and explore and blow out all the air that you can, there's still about a third of the capacity of your lungs that don't get used. And so there's a range where you have about 2/3 of the capacity that you can actually use for singing purposes. And if you can increase your capacity, that will make it possible for you to do a variety of things. One of which is to sing some longer phrases. Do any of you have any challenges running out of breath in any of the songs that you sing? I see one head nodding yes. For most people, the answer is no, because square dancing is a kind of a form of popular singing, and the phraseology is organized in relatively short phrases. You measure it in beats, I measure it in seconds, and most square dance calling phrases last between 4 and 5, sometimes 6 seconds. And with no training at all, the normal human being can sustain a singing sound for 5 to 6 seconds. But every once in a while, for styling purposes, you'll want to string those sentences together. You'll want to run phrases together. And now all of a sudden, you're not dealing with 4 seconds, but now 8 seconds, 10 seconds, 12 seconds. And that requires some management. Okay, that's one of the things that you have to do. Along the way, there are some other things about this activator that I'd like to talk to you about. One of them is that you want to be able to get your breath to move in a vigorous way, vigorous enough to make your vocal folds vibrate, but not so vigorous that you run out of breath too quickly. And so one of the things that I use in my teaching is the imaginary pinwheel. If you'll stick up your index finger in front of your mouth and imagine that you have a child's pinwheel on it, hold it about 2 or 3 inches in front of your mouth, and imagine that you're going to blow on that pinwheel and keep your breath going. You know, if you blow right on the tip of your finger, you can tell if the breath is still there, if it's still going, and so it'll be a measure. So here we go, and I'm going to time you. So blow, go. This is gentle blow, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. Nobody's dead yet. That's good. Your capacity is very good. We don't have to have any more lessons. We're all done with that. The truth of the matter is that's not true, because it's, again, a question of stamina, not just doing it one time. So now, if you were to use your breath at that speed, you didn't use very much breath. Stick your hand up again. This time, imagine that the pinwheel is moving at a moderate speed. Go. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. So you're actually doing fine there. And that more increased movement of breath is going to be really useful when we start talking about the vibrator. Now, imagine that the pinwheel is moving really fast. Okay? Here we go. 1, 2, think what your body is doing to try to keep that capacity working. 7, 8, 9, and it gets a little harder to make it happen because you're moving more breath along the way. Well, that capacity to move breath at varying speeds is one of the tools that you can use to change the quality of your voice as you go along. Sometimes you need a very powerful delivery. That takes more breath. Sometimes you need a gentler delivery. That might take less breath. Along the way, I'd like to have you blow hard. And I won't tell you how to do it. I just want you to go. Would you do that? Again. Again. It takes me a second to get my eyes around everybody in the room. All of you use the same tool. You take all of the muscles in the upper part of your torso and you contract them. And when you contract them, that makes less room in your lungs, and you got too much air in too small a space, so the air goes flowing out of you. Now, I'm going to ask you to do it a different way. I don't know any other way to describe this except that it's a little bit like having a bowel movement. You bear down. Instead of contracting inward and upward, you go this way. Downward. Will you do that? Go. And you discover that you can also get air to come out of your mouth pretty vigorously that way as well. Put the pinwheel back up in front of you. But this time, now you're going to do that with your breath rather than that. Does that make any sense to anybody? there's a kind of a counter-lever action going on right now. Everybody fully understands the inward and upward, because the logic of that is that as you squeeze inward, the air goes that way. But doing that, pushing downward, seems a little bit counterproductive, does it not? It seems a little counterintuitive. It isn't actually, and I'm not going to explain why unless you force me to, because it takes too long. But there's a kind of a system inside your body that makes this possible. So you got your pinwheels in front of yourselves. Blow gently while gently bearing down. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. For most of you, you have about the same capacity. You're still going. Just leave that to a woman. I mean, that's got to be the answer right there, isn't it? It's a gender issue. Sorry. Okay, so now bear down a little bit more, and you'll see that the airstream will speed up, and it will maybe not last as long. Let's find out. So you're going to make the pinwheel move at moderate speed. Go. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. About the same. A little bit shorter, right? This is a little bit foreign, isn't it? It feels a little peculiar. Okay, now make it move fast. Bearing down vigorously. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. So some people come to this easier than others, but there are two different ways that you can get air to come out of your body. One of them is to do that. The other one is to sort of bear down on it. And does anybody really want to know why? If not, then let's go right on. Yeah. Okay, so the activator is your lungs and the muscles that control your lungs. They are the ones that get the energy started to make the vocal folds vibrate. Here's a question.
I was told that when you inhale to get the breath in, not to raise the shoulders.
There are a variety of ways that you can get air into your body. One of them is to raise your shoulders. One of them is to expand your chest. Another one is to expand the bottom of your lungs, bottom of your rib cage. The truth of the matter is that the bottom of the rib cage is the most efficient way, and the top of the rib cage is the least efficient way. If you think about it, your ribs are attached at your spine, and at the front they're attached to the sternum for the first 6 or 7 ribs. So their ability to move is inhibited because they're attached at both ends. The bottom ribs, beginning with 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, are gradually, they start to fan away from the sternum, and they're attached ligamentally to each other rather than muscle or bone to bone. Right? So there's a greater degree of flexibility at the bottom of the rib cage, and that's why you can get more breath capacity by breathing low at the bottom of the rib cage than high at the top of the chest. Did that answer your question, John? Okay, good. So let's move on from the vibrator, from the activator. We get to the vibrator. Yes, hold on.
So the pressing down that you're talking about, is that when you breathe and use the chest opposed to the diaphragm?
No, actually what happens is that there is a system of musculature. This one I'll need to show you, and then I can answer that question. So you already felt what it feels like to inhale, right? By making a small opening, you could feel the expansion going on at the bottom of your rib cage. That's your diaphragm at work. Will you all now blow on the back of your hands? I'll show you how, and we'll excuse everybody the rude noises we'll make. Now, you don't know what I'm doing. The people on the microphone can't tell, but I'm placing my hand over the back of my mouth, over the back of my hand, and I'm blowing vigorously and not letting the air out. Would you do that? Do you feel some muscular activity going on in your body somewhere? Yeah. You feel the cheeks balloon out. That's really not what the answer that I was looking for, but that is a byproduct. Most of you should have felt somewhere in your lower abdomen a strong inward contraction, because the abdominal girdle is designed for that purpose. It's designed to help us expel things. So when we cough, when we laugh, when we scream, those muscles have a tendency to squeeze inwards. And they squeeze inwards because as they do so, all of our intestines and our stomach and pancreas and so forth then get thrust up underneath the bottom side of the diaphragm, which drives the energy out. You may not realize this, but muscles can't push. They can only pull. They can only contract. And so the diaphragm, in its contraction, goes downward, making more space in the chest so air comes in. It's a law of aerodynamics and physics that when you have fewer air molecules at a bigger space, that's low pressure, so air comes from some other source and fills up the lungs. Then you shrink the space, all of a sudden you've got too many molecules in too small of a space, so they go out to equalize the air pressure out in the world around us. So the diaphragm, when it goes, it flexes downward. But the diaphragm cannot push air out. As it relaxes, it will dispel a little air, but it can't do it with any vigor because it's got no muscle fibers going that direction. But the abdominal wall is the expelling set of muscles. And so when you contract those, they push up underneath the diaphragm. So as it goes to its relaxed place, it now has some oomph behind it, and it sends the air out. That's why it's so easy and so logical to understand that when you go and you contract inward and upward, the air goes out. The illogic of it is when you bear down, why does it work? Why does that lead to airflow? And the answer is found in the fact that in the center of the diaphragm there is a bit of a trampoline. There's a bit of a ligamental core that's not muscle fiber at all, but it's flexible. When you push on it, it will yield. So when you stretch the diaphragm down low by it holding on to the sense of inhalation or bearing down, the muscles stay firm, which means the center of the trampoline is now taut and flexible. Everybody with me so far? So then, as you start to contract the abdominal muscles up underneath, the center bed of the diaphragm will start to bow upwards and put pressure on the underside of the lungs. And the value of that is that the stream of air is not so vigorous and fast against the vocal folds as to create reaction, a negative reaction. It just gets the air in motion, and it also gives you a means of managing breath over an extended period of time by the degree of downward pressure that you put on yourselves. I see some of your eyes glassing over. I'll get off my professorial side. So that's one of the reasons why that happens that way. You look really puzzled. Well, I've been spending a lot of years trying to understand it myself. But this issue is, there are people, most people in the world, when they sing, they just let their air go in and up. Those are the people who often have trouble making phrases last very long. The people that learn to do this other way, where you bear down and the air exits, are the ones who can learn to manage their breath over time. It's about that simple. Okay, so the mechanics you don't really need to pay a bit of attention to. It's just that's how it works. We're going to go on to the vibrator, and the vibrator is a really interesting thing. That we got two flaps of flesh. They're more complex than just flaps of skin. They have muscle fibers and they have some elastic abilities, but they're really small, and they sit in our voice box, in our larynx, right in our throat. And if you'll just hold up your right thumb and look at your thumbnail, that'll tell you approximately how long your vocal folds are. That we have a proportionality to ourselves. Men's vocal folds are bigger normally than women, but there are women who are large women who have vocal folds the same size as men, and there are gentle, small men who have vocal folds the size of women, but nevertheless, they're about the length of your thumbnail. That's really small, and they're not very thick either. They're about the thickness of 2 or 3 of these pencil leads. If you have a 0.5 millimeter pencil lead, you stack 4 of those together, that's about how thick the vocal folds are. So they're really small things, and it's quite amazing that those little flaps of flesh can make so much sound, and that they can do as many things as they can do. It's a very sophisticated system that we have in our throat that anthropologists say has nothing to do with anything except there's a kind of a muscular setup that sphincters the throat off, so that when you lift a heavy object, you get your vocal folds closed. That compresses the air in your lungs, gives you upper body strength. So it's called the fight or flight syndrome, that whenever somebody finds themselves in that kind of a sense, the vocal folds will have a tendency to sphincter close. And so anthropologists think, oh, that's the reason we got it. And I don't think so at all. I think that's a good function, but I think that we were born to talk and we were born to sing, and it wasn't by accident that this sophisticated system was put in place for us. Anyway, these two vocal folds can't do anything on their own. They have to be activated by the air passing through them. In past years, I've used a couple of pieces of paper and blown between the pieces of paper, and you can see the effect. It's called the Bernoulli principle, and it's just a law of aerodynamics. It's the law that caused the plane to fly, that got you all here, but it also works in your throat, that as the air comes up through the trachea, passing through the vocal folds, it sets up a low pressure. And you know what low pressure does. It draws things toward it. And so the vocal folds get drawn together. And if you hit a certain velocity, the vocal folds will actually start to vibrate. We can't see that happen. I guess if I brought the right equipment, we could see that happen. But we can simulate it by using our lips. So will you close your lips? Now open them so that they're almost touching, but not closed all the way. So I'll demonstrate. They're just barely not there. And I'm going to blow through those and watch what happens. Nothing. Now let me watch what happens if I increase the velocity of my breath. What would happen if I increased my velocity a little bit more? They start to vibrate. And you saw that initially my lips weren't closed. It wasn't, but they were apart. So what made them start to vibrate? That Bernoulli principle. As the air passed through, they were drawn closed. As they were closed, the air backed up a little bit until there was enough pressure to blow them apart. They get blown apart. The air passes. The suction happens. And there's this little threshold, this little point of efficiency. When you hit it, then your voice just kind of sings itself. It makes its own sound, kind of like what I did with my lips. Except that your lips are a whole lot bigger and have more mass associated with them than your vocal folds do. So it takes less action to activate your vocal folds than it does to activate your lips. I'll demonstrate. If I were to say this, you can hear there's just very little sound there. There's very little closure in my vocal folds. There's a lot of leakage. The air is moving through, but it's moving at a very slow speed. Now watch what happens when I leave my throat in the very same position, but accelerate the speed. Here there's still a little bit of wastage, a little bit of white noise in the background, but there's more sound than there used to be. So now I'm going to increase the velocity again. Remember how you can increase velocity? We did it with the little pinwheel. Your body already knows how to do that. So now I'm going to increase that velocity a little bit more. Now that's almost that point of efficiency, wouldn't you agree? No more white noise, almost full sound. One last go. And then it's a fully complete, almost resonant tone that has no other origin than the fact that my vocal folds are now vibrating efficiently. So what happens to many people who don't know any better is that they'll start off and their voice will be this way, and it won't be very efficient. And so if you try to boss anybody around like this, they won't listen to you. And anybody that's been a parent has long since given up that kind of sound making, because you can't get kids to do what they're supposed to. Any square dancer that starts out with that sound knows immediately, gets the feedback that you don't have enough command in your voice. So the problem in that example that I was just giving to you is that there was too little breath going to activate it. So have you ever thought that breathiness comes from too little breath, that motion? Usually you think, oh, I got too much breath. And that's exactly the opposite side that happens. People say, oh, I've got a breathy tone. So I have to press my voice tighter. I have to make it more penetrating. And sure enough, it's more penetrating. But who wants to listen to this for 3 hours? Sounds like I'm ticked off all the time. You stupid dancers can't tell what you're doing. And it has nothing to do with that. It has to do with the simple biomechanics of your body, right? But most people start off and they say, I'm too breathy. So I gotta be tighten up in my throat. There. Is that the right answer? No. There's another byproduct that's not very good about that sound, and that is you can't do it very long before you start losing your voice. That's called pressing phonation. And that's because the muscles that close the glottis in toward that sort of sphincter place are overactive, and so it compresses the voice. It causes the vocal folds, the edges of the vocal folds, to vibrate. It leads to tickles. It leads to nodes, and it's not very nice to listen to. So that's not a good example either. And in one sense, you're sort of looking at a bell curve. You all from your mathematical days remember what bell curves look like. But when you're over on one side of the bell curve with insufficient airflow, you get this kind of thing. And when you're on the other side, due to insufficient airflow, you get this kind of thing. And in between, there's a range of flexibility between how much closure and how much breath that you've got going. Would each one of you in your own, we'll all do this together, so nobody's on the spot. Would you start, you need your pinwheel back again, and I want you to find the gentlest sound that you can make. This is like a whisper that has just a little bit of voice associated with it. So it's, that kind of a sound. Okay, so, yeah, I wouldn't want to be sitting next to you, John, at church if that's the best whisper you got. So you can give, what I'm talking about. Oh, this sermon sure is dry, meaning to be a whisper, and it's not. Like, I don't. Anyway, can you make it gentler, John? Oh, that's right. Your wife will thank me. Okay, so you can all do that kind of a sound. This is the speed at which the pinwheel moves very slowly. Now accelerate the speed. Make the speed of the pinwheel about moderate. But keep your throat in that same sighing position and watch what happens. Go. Collectively, you can hear that there's more sound happening. But it's still not efficient. It hasn't hit that point of efficiency. So now accelerate the pinwheel in your mind and keep your throat the same. Go. Some people have hit the threshold and some have not. Okay? Now make it move fast. Basically, that's right. I hear one or two that are still a little bit on the breathy side, but you can examine this yourself. You can know, that's too loose. That's a little more sound. It's still loose. Good. That's a full sound. That still feels loose in my throat. How did I do that? Because most of us think about that full sound as being tight in the throat a little bit. So I want to try to disabuse your minds about that. Now that's how you find that threshold. How do you get the vibrator to work really efficiently? The problem is the vibrator isn't the same. It's not like a duck call. It's actually these little flaps of flesh are very sophisticated. They are activated by one set of muscles that are embedded inside them, and when those muscles flex, the vocal folds get short and they get thick, and you get a rich, resonant, usually low, often loud sound, like this. And all that is a change. Now the vibrator is in a different configuration, and so it takes a little bit more energy to make it vibrate, and as a result of that, you get a different sonority. There's another set of muscles that work on the vocal folds that, when they work, the vocal folds stretch out long, and they can become thin, and then you get this kind of a sound. Now, that's still me, but it's a different me than this. This is one muscular configuration. This is another muscular configuration, and you can get gradations between those. So it's not like you just have to find one threshold. You find a threshold for almost every single pitch that you sing. Well, that's too much to think about, except that the feelings are the same. So that when you hit that threshold here, there's a vibration down into my body, but here in my throat, it's passive. And when I'm there's a passivity here, but the vibrations aren't down in my chest at all. They're up in my head. And that's basically what voice users realize, is that you have a light voice, the thin vocal folds, and a heavy voice, the heavy vocal folds. For you lady callers, can you see a correlation here a little bit? Because men, when they talk, stay in that heavy, or what's called the chest voice, almost always. Not always, but almost always. But women generally don't. Women generally, culturally, speak in their light voice. And so you get this kind of a sound, a more lyrical kind of a quality. And many women in CALLERLAB have been encouraged to go here and grow hair on their chest and other things that will make them act a little bit more like men. When the truth is that a woman's voice modulates the same as a man's voice up and down and has the same sort of sonorities. Unfortunately, what happens is when a woman is in this kind of her voice, and I'll talk more about this in Ladies Calling, when a woman is in the light part of her voice and wants to get more power, she presses her voice, and then it sounds irritating. And so the response that the caller coaches give is, you need to modulate your voice differently. And the answer is absolutely correct. It does need to modulate differently. It doesn't necessarily have to modulate down. It just has to modulate differently. It has to move away from tension and move into a natural delivery. So a woman's voice that sings in the higher range and sings healthily is easily audible, easily followed, easily maintained. But a man's voice, but a woman's voice in the upper range that's shrill and strident is irritating, hard to understand, and not successful in singing. The same thing goes for a man. A man who has a tightness in his voice has an irritant associated with it that makes it hard to hear. Often, when a person is singing with tension in the voice box, the extra muscles in the region have a tendency to stiffen up and tight, particularly the tongue. And when the tongue gets stiff and tight, then all of a sudden they stop freeing big vowels normally, and it's hard to understand the person. And as soon as the tongue is liberated to go where it's supposed to go, vowels become articulate. It's easy to make the consonants. It's easy to understand. So principles of language start to creep in. Are there any questions that you'd like to talk about in terms of the vibrator portion? Over here, Fran.
Feels tight. What do you do? What can you do to correct it, or what are you doing wrong that causes your voice to feel tight sometimes?
Generally speaking, the reason that you feel that tightness is because there's an insufficiency of breath flow for the amount of constriction that there is in the throat. You've dropped off of that threshold on the muscular side, and that pressing quality makes a voice very tired quickly. It feels very tight. There was another hand up here.
In the process of breathing through your vibrator, is this where you get the effect of going from a basic tone to like into a falsetto type tone? Is this where you drive that into a falsetto, or?
That's a good question. The issue about the falsetto, the male falsetto, is that the vocal folds start to shape like the normal head voice or the light should be, but most men don't know how to use it. And so they begin to feel a certain amount of discomfort and tension. And as a result of that, there's a kind of an overload switch that causes the muscles that would normally close the vocal folds to just let go. What characterizes a falsetto is that the vocal folds don't close all the way. So you get this kind of a sound, doesn't have any strength in it, but you can get this kind of a sound which is very similar, but it's full vibration. And for men, they have to learn how to do that. They have to get in touch with their feminine side a little bit more. I don't see anybody excited about that. But there is a wide modulation of voice colors available to both genders, and they follow the same biomechanics. The problem is that we are overlaid by culture, and the culture is that the man theoretically is commanding, and therefore men cultivate this kind of a voice. Bossy men cultivate this kind of a voice. Square dance callers who are bossy men. I'm waiting for a response. I'm trying. Are you guys awake? Have a tendency to use the command quality of their voice, this heavier quality. And when they do so, they get the command out of it, but they also lock themselves out of the upper part of their voice. Whereas there is another way to get that command in the voice that's ever so much more efficient and less troublesome. So in the vocal issues, we're talking about two registers and then an intermingling of those, a high voice, a low voice, or a gentle voice and a commanding voice. John?
Frequently, I think that we hear callers and they don't seem to be projecting. And one of the things I think concerns us as people who are coaching callers, how do you convince them, other than the fact of airflow, that they need to project in order to become louder without adjusting the microphone out of proportion?
Thank you. That's a really good question, and I'm going to take a little bit of a detour to answer it. The truth of the matter is, when you find that threshold of efficiency in your voice, one of the characteristics is that it will project. And so anybody that's not projecting is not efficient in their voice usage. So the problem is that many of us have been raised in households where children were to be seen and not heard. And as a result of that, when you come to the point where you have to take a dominant role with your voice, many people have a cultural obstacle that makes them uncomfortable by taking that dominant role, by letting their voice have command in it. And it's a childhood. It's left over from childhood. When we get over to the resonators, we're going to talk a little bit about what I call primal sound, which is something that all of us were born with. And you all have been around 2 or 3 children that use their outside voices, that have that primal quality in it, and it's deafening. And so it doesn't take very long for mother and dad to say, use your inside voice, don't use your outside voice. Or you go to church and they say, use your reverent voice, don't use your outside voice. Or you go to school and they say, shut up. And by the end of elementary school, culturally, most people have been weaned out of that natural primal quality in their voice. So it's culturally unacceptable for most people to use that sound. And then you've all had friends who came from noisy and boisterous households, who, when they went through school, clear up into high school, they were just always really loud and really raucous. And where you enjoyed their exuberance, but it was embarrassing at times because they just didn't have the couth to know how to modulate their voices. Well, they were the lucky ones, actually, because they weren't inhibited in that natural characteristic, right? So one of the things that you have to address if you go through this process of finding that threshold of efficiency, and you can get them there, then you watch their body language. If their body language says, I'm uncomfortable, then you're probably dealing with an emotional or a psychological or a cultural taboo that says, I just can't. I don't want anybody to think that I'm upset with them, or I don't want to feel like I'm being pushy. And it's usually those kinds of emotional things that have been ingrained into them. I want everybody to think that I'm a good person. I don't want them. You know what I'm talking about. I'm trying hard to put that in words, but there's an emotional element that's very endemic in our culture. I don't know that it's true in all cultures, but it's certainly true in our culture. Any questions more about that? Yes, here's a question. Barbara.
Well, I know, confidence seems to be a big thing. When they tell you can't sing and then you're trying to sing, then because you're not confident that it's going to come out right, then you sing worse.
Yeah, there's no question about inhibition being a problem there. But we're talking about something else that's beyond that. that if you physically can do it, but emotionally you can't do it, then you're dealing with a taboo. My definition of a taboo is something that says, I just can't do that and I don't know why. I know, and usually at the other end of that fear, I'm afraid of something. And what are you afraid of? I don't know. I just know that I shouldn't do that. That's an imposed cultural norm that has lost its validity. There maybe was some validity in the childhood just to save their mother's ears or their school teacher's ears. But in terms of reality, there's no validity to that sound. Girls are especially susceptible to that because they're supposed to be nice. And, of course, with the rising generation, that's less and less true. And, the young ladies are just as aggressive as the boys and sometimes more so. But it's also manifest in the way that they use their voices as well. So that's a level of complexity that may touch on your issue. And my advice to you caller coaches would be to give them permission while they're on the podium calling the dance to use their efficient voice. And the minute they step away from the microphone, they can go back to their mousy voice with all goodwill. But they can't be successful on the stand with the microphone in their hands if they're held hostage by that taboo. So you identify it for what it really is. It's a taboo, and you say, let's put that taboo to the test. The next time you go out to call a dance or just one tip, you use your efficient voice. And the next time, you use your normal speaking voice. And then let's watch and see what the response is from the callers. And if your efficient voice, that threshold voice, gets you more positive reinforcement, then it's time for you to let go of that fear. Because it's not true. It's a childhood behavior that's lapped over. Okay, anything else about the vibrators? Oh, there are also some sets of muscles that will open and close your vocal folds. And one of the ways that you can find that efficiency is to make sure that you're not grinding your vocal folds too hard together. That's the kind of thing in coughing, pressed phonation, that can lead to vocal abuse. And there are many, many people whose natural speaking voices are a little bit this way, and those people don't mean to. Most of us just learn to talk by imitating the people that are around us. And if we hear people whom we admire and they talk this way, we will learn to talk this way. But the best thing to do is to not give in to that. John?
It seems to me that when you hear that, you hear a tenseness in the voice. And as a coach, we would say to them, lighten up. You're too tense in your voice, and you know that you're restricting your vocal cords. And that, to me, goes back to the breathiness problem, the breathing problem.
That's really true. But many people don't, I can't think of a single person that used their cognition to say, this is the way that I'm going to speak. Now, as an adult, you do that. You can do that. But it's really, really hard to retrain habits that have been with you for all of your adult life. And if you've been speaking a certain way for 45 years, and then I come along and say, just loosen up, or if a caller coach says, just release the pressures here, increase the breath flow, they see the success, they think, oh, great. And 10 minutes later, the old behaviors are right back at it. And that's a real critical issue that I'm going to talk about with caller coaches later today, about how do you persist at something long enough so that the patterns can change. It isn't enough to say it once. It has to be said again and again and again. And you, as singers, need to make notes on the mirror, or you need to say, you develop a series of affirmations that say, I will not talk this way. I will not talk this way. I will talk this way. And how do I know what it feels like? The analysis, when I hit that threshold of efficiency, there's an ease, there's a buzziness, there's an amplitude of sound, any kind of descriptor that you give that says, what's the difference between this and this? And you can tell the difference. Anybody that hears it can tell the difference. You can tell it by how it feels. So those of you that are caller coaches, you can take to the bank that if it sounds different, it feels different. So if somebody says, you hear a substantial difference, and they say, well, I can't tell the difference, they're just not attentive. There are a lot of people who are not kinesthetically wired. No, most people learn by seeing or by hearing and not by feeling. But to be a good singer, you have to develop kinesthetic senses. And so as I teach people to sing, I'll start off by juxtaposing bad behavior and good behavior, back and forth, until they can tell me the difference between them. They have to say it. It's not me putting words in their mouth. Sometimes I get impatient to do that. But the best thing is for them to say, this feels like this, that feels like that, I'm going to do this, I'm not going to do that. And that's the kind of affirmation I'm talking about. Okay, so any other questions about the activator or the vibrator? You now know more than you ever wanted to know about those subjects, right? And none of it means anything. It's like, woohoo! Okay, so I'm now going to go back and give you some things that you can do to find and develop these things in your voice. You'll remember I asked you to breathe in, sets of 40. The next thing that you do is you breathe out, sets of 10, 40 times a day. There's a set of 10 I finish. Give myself a rest, then I do another set of 10. I mean, heaven's sakes, when you're driving in the car, this is a pretty good activity. When you're in the bathroom, you got nothing else to do, you might as well breathe. You know? No, that's the wrong place. I breathe, not smell. Breathe. Right? There are ways to put these kind of activities in and around the things that you do. You're at the sink washing dishes. Breathe. You're folding laundry. Breathe. You're mowing the lawn. Breathe. There are, but do it in a kind of an orderly fashion so that it doesn't add time to your day. It just allows you to develop skills intermingled with other things that don't require a lot of attention. So, inhaling, exhaling, that's how you get some control. And if you really want to get better breath control, you say to yourself, I'm going to exhale for a certain number of seconds. And it's hard to monitor, but you can do it by forming an S or an SH or something that makes noise, like shh or s, or you can feel, and then you just pace them off. So I'm going to do sets of 10, and I'm going to go for 10 seconds. Oh, I can't quite make 10 seconds. Okay. So cut it back to 7 seconds. I can do 7 seconds. Good. Do it for a whole week. Next week, add a second. First of the week, you're going, I can't make it. By the end of the week, you're making it. Next week, you add a second. And you should be able to keep that up until you're up in the range of 14 or 15 seconds of exhalation. That's an actual skill that you can develop. The ability to manage your breath over a period of time. Now, one of the things that you're going to discover is that when you breathe downwardly, you'll have more success in the long run than if you, in fact, breathe upward. And that has to do with the vibrator, because the vibrators have some little sensors at the bottom side of them, so that when you thrust a hurricane at them from beneath, the first thing they're going to do is hunker down. It's just like a 15-year-old girl when you say she can't go out with that boy. There's a resistance to it, right? And so it's a bit of a trick. So the trick is to keep your breath so that it's delivering, but not delivering in gale force. Just delivering steadily. How are we doing on time? Good, I'm doing all right. We're going to make it through this topic fine. Now, in terms of the vibrator stuff, in terms of activating the threshold, there's a perfect and simple activity that you do, and they're just called contact releases. You hear me start really gently until it hits that point of efficiency. If you sing every note that you sing that way, it will sound like you're singing sausages. So it's not a good idea in actual practice. But in your practicing a part, it's a great thing to do. You have a little trouble with a high note that sort of you hit it and it hits you back hard. Go at it gently. Find that threshold of efficiency and let your voice grow into its natural place. Eventually, what you end up with is ah, 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 ah. And by those multiple repetitions, you train the breathing system to deliver just the right breath at the right speed, the vocal folds to close to a certain range where they will actually all come together and make a very efficient, easily produced sound. As I said to you before, it isn't just that the vibrator is always the same. So you can't just do this drill in one range. You have to go ah, 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 and you just figure out, let your body figure it out. And at first, it's a little bit like riding a bicycle. You tip over and you skin your knees. And then after a while, you develop the coordination where you don't have to worry about it. That isn't between today and tomorrow. It's not between today and next week. It's not even today and next month. But over an extended period of time, you can gradually change behaviors. One of the nifty things about changing behaviors is that if you persist in the new behavior, it first becomes familiar and then natural, normal, habitual, the old behavior leaves. But it doesn't happen in short term. It happens in long term. So it's hard to find the motivation to stay with it. And I'm going to talk about that with the caller coaches a little bit later too. All right, so now we're going to get over to once you make that raw sound in your throat, how do you shape it? Well, the first and foremost thing that you have to do is to shape it into identifiable words. And that means first and foremost vowels. Sounds are carried on vowels. Consonants are interrupters to vowels. And so the primary task is to get the vowels shaped right. You're going to have to participate with me on this. So would all of you say the word cheese? We're going to talk about cheese and pizza just before lunch today. And I think I'll just get your appetite whetted for lunch. Say it again. Cheese. Elongate the E. Cheese. Now, if you're doing it like I'm doing it, like most Americans do it, you'll feel your tongue bunch and draw a little bit back in your mouth. It'll spread out between your molars, and you'll feel a little buzziness right in the back of your mouth. Would you do that again? Cheese. Anybody not feel that? You felt the vibrations I was discussing. Yours, let's see, you're Richard. What did you feel?
I don't really think I felt anything. It
just felt normal. Yeah. Okay, so there's an example of kinesthetics not at work. So say it again. Cheese. Yes. Can you feel where your tongue is? Does your tongue on the sides spread out between your molars? Try it. Say cheese. Can you feel it press out against your molars to the side at the back of your mouth? Oh, yeah. There's cognition that comes in, because if you haven't been aware about the processes, it just happens and you don't think about it. But if you're going to change it, you have to figure it out so that you know what it is that you want to change. Now, there's another byproduct of that. Would you take your thumb and jam yourself under your chin? First, second, third chin. Doesn't matter. Just one of those chins under there. Okay? Say that again. Cheese. Cheese. Do you feel it tense? Feel it bear down? That's the American E vowel. It's not a very successful singing vowel, because as you get that tension and you go, cheese, it just gets tighter and tighter the higher you go in your range, which means that it's hard to say that vowel correctly in a high range. It gets a lot of tension in it. You can hear it as it climbs into my voice. There's an edginess, and that edginess is the thing that lady callers get criticized for, and men callers, when they sing in their high range, get criticized for. It's not the height, it's the tension that's the irritant. So if you can figure out how to eliminate the irritant, the tension, then it doesn't matter what range you sing in, unless you're an opera singer and you're singing high C's. And nobody in CALLERLAB sings high C's, unless they're wanting to show off at a moment, right? And it doesn't matter whether you understand the words or not, but you don't do that why you're giving the cue, right? No. Now say the word pizza. Pizza. Elongate the E. Pizza. If you did like I do, then you'll see that your tongue does not pull back and spread between your molars, that it arches forward just a little bit. And if it touches any of your teeth, it's right here, right at your eye teeth. Maybe not at all. You can also, if you're really attentive, you can see that it kind of gets a channel. The tongue gets a channel across the top, and so the vibrations sit in a different place. Cheese, the American E, sits in a ball right back here by your molars. Pizza buzzes right underneath your nose or on the tip of your on your front teeth. Try it and see if that proves to be true for you. Pizza. Pizza. It's a different vibration. What's interesting about it is it's the same vowel. It's just differently made. And so that's the thing that I just showed you is a singer's vowel. It's also an Italian vowel, so the Italians speak with that. So there's a good reason why the Italians were the first culture to start singing. Their language was really adept. It set up those sonorities. And German, French, English, that all came a whole lot later. And so you get that change in the vowel, and you'll get a different result. So here we go. You're going to say pizza again. Pizza. What we're doing is we're reshaping the position of your tongue in a very slight way to produce the same vowel that you need without the accumulated tensions that you normally have to deal with as a result of the English language. You can also match those vowels so that you become efficient moving from one vowel to the other. I'm going to ask you now to say E, P, U, 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 back and forth really quickly. Go. E, U, 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 U. One more time. Pizza. Pizza. Elongate. P, U, 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 U. Stop on the U. Somebody better stop. Stop on the U. There's a place where those vowels will equalize. You can hear it happen in my voice. There's an extra sonority that ties those things together so that they sound like they're coming from the same place. You can still hear an E, you can still hear a U, but there's something else that makes them unified. Can you hear that happen in my voice? You'll feel it in your voice. And what will happen is that at the beginning, the E will be way forward, the U will be way back, and after a while it will sort of equalize somewhere in the middle. You'll sense it. Here you go. Pizza, pizza, P. Now alternating. E, U, 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 U. Okay, now I'm going to ask some people. Okay, Tom. Does that feel like a normal U?
You? No.
It sits in your mouth in a different place, doesn't it, when it gets equalized? Can you describe where it is, Barbara? I'm going to do it again.
It's like underneath my nose.
That's right. Normally, when we say you, we feel the energy at the back of our mouths on the soft palate at the back of our mouth. Now that you're saying that the ooh stops and it buzzes right up in the front. And so what happens is that you take one of the positive characteristics of the E vowel, which is its projectability, and the relaxed nature of the U, and they sort of intermingle, and they get the best of both worlds. So in terms of movement, it's really easy to get between those two things once you figure it out. What are the moving parts when you sing? Your mouth can open and close. Your tongue can go up and down. Your tongue can go forward and back. So these drills will help you get control of those things in a more conscious way and not make them so abstract, so unthought about. Okay, so here's E, pizza. Try it. Pizza. Now go, yeah, 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 yeah. Most people in our culture, when they go from E to A, their tongue retracts in their mouth. So it goes, and you don't move your jaw. But now watch what happens when you do. Well, here's the one where you don't. And then those never equalize. They're always distinctive from each other. But now listen. And there's that little sonority that ties them together. And what's interesting is that they feel like they unify. So would you do that? Just first start off by saying yay, 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 yay. So you have to open your mouth. Most people don't use their jaws as much as they should. And this is a drill. So go. Yay, 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 yay. Stop on the A. After you get it equalized, stop on the A. Go. Yay, 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 yay. It's like, oh. It feels really strangely, doesn't it? Okay, I'm going to go over to you, Jerry. Does that feel like a normal A?
No.
How does it feel different than normal?
I never felt it before.
Never drew attention to it before. That's correct. That's a good observation. But if now say your normal A vowel. Just say the word gate.
Gate.
Elongate.
Gate.
Now go yay, 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 yay.
Yay, 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 yay.
And then sustain it.
And then sustain it.
Like oh. Yay, 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 yay.
Yay, 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 yay. Let's pull it up.
Yeah, it sits in the front of your mouth. It's in a different position than what you're used to having it. Take that A vowel. It's the vowel like in chaos. Okay? And go A-O, 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 quickly. A-O, 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 and then stop on the O. What a lively crew. We're having a great time here. Thanks very much. Try it one more time. A-O, 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 A-O. Does it feel normal? Does that feel the same? Feels normal.
I'm noticing. The only thing that I'm noticing is I say like the A in gate, my tongue is back somewhat.
Yeah, you didn't get off on a good start.
In all cases here with the E and the U, I feel that my tongue's out front here against the back of the lower teeth.
You're exactly right about that. And so part of the reason why you didn't get the result that I was hoping for is that when you started out with the word chaos, it wasn't that yay, yay, yay vowel. It was the K, the American A, where your tongue's retracted to begin with. So I'm not going to spend a whole lot more time on this, except to say that this is another drill that you can do for yourselves. If you start out with the vowel E, which is really easy to distinguish between pizza and cheese, the one being an Italian word, the other one being an American word, you can really distinguish the difference between those vowels. That's your starting point. And then you try to match all of the other vowels to that pattern. I will go through them quickly. So, P, cheese, pizza. You can hear the difference when I say them. Pizza, cheese, pizza. The pizza's clearer, maybe a more resonant vowel. Then E, A, 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 O, A, O, A, O, A, O, A, O, A, O. And I can promise you that isn't where I normally say O when I speak. But that's where I sing, because I've practiced it. Then, E, E, A, 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 Ya, 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 Ya. Most people, when they do an ah, they go, E, Ah, E, Ah, Ya, 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 Ya. You'll see the lack of movement in my jaw. And if the light were such, you could see the massive movement in my tongue, whereby I would be forward for the A and retracted and falling downward on the ah. And in the process of doing that, your tongue moves in the wrong direction and it starts to block your throat. So, if you go, ya, then there's presence, resonance, natural, unforced resonance in the body. Ya has tension in it and will create trouble. And it'll be hard to understand. So then, the last one, ya, 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 wa, 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 wa. Yeah, so anyway, you can equalize those vowels in a very natural way. Okay, so that's the first and foremost thing that you need to do when you're trying to modify your singing to capitalize on the resonance, is to figure an easy way to go from one vowel to the other. Who would ever think to take a language apart and isolate its elements? But that's really how you make the changes. You move down on that simple scale. The next thing that I'd like to talk to you about, and maybe the last thing, would be to talk about something that I mentioned earlier, and that's the primal quality of the voice. When you were born, you came into this world hardwired to cry, to suck, and to poop. And that was about all you knew how to do. And then you learned everything else that you needed to know after that. You've listened to a newborn baby cry. It's at times a very sweet thing. At 3 o'clock in the morning, it's not a sweet thing. And babies will go on and on and on until their needs are met. That's their only defensive system, is their cry. And that cry is so small, but so penetrating, that you can't resist it. And it's a survival technique. So everybody comes hardwired to make that primal sound. That's the reason that I've given it that name. It's the very first sound that we make. Everybody has it. However, it gets filtered out of us as we go. So I'm going to count for you, and you'll hear immediately when primal sound is in there and when it's not. So I'm going to count to 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Still me, right? Still my same voice. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And you can obviously tell that when I take that primal quality out, the voice becomes softer. It's one of the means whereby we modulate or mute our voices to stay inside the cultural norms that we've been given. You don't have to teach somebody how to do that. They already know how to do that. What you do have to do is to give them permission to do it, because that's where the taboo lies. And so in the initial stages, if you can get somebody to sing, "Hello, my name is Arden Hopkin, and I'm not talking very loudly, but I'm talking with a strict command in my voice." School teachers are saved by the ability to use primal sound, because it doesn't make them have to talk loud. You've all been in the classroom where a teacher will say, "All right, boys and girls, it's time to be quiet." And you do immediately. And then there are other teachers who say, "If you don't sit down," and they just kind of, but the one gets worn out, emotionally worn out, physically worn out. The other one just is calm and cool and collected. And so if you're out on the dance floor and you've got a square dance caller who has that command in his voice, that primal quality in his voice, then you'll listen. It's an arresting sound. It makes us want to pay attention. Who are the people that use primal sound in their everyday lives? Newspaper salesmen on the corner. Why do they do primal sound? Because it projects and penetrates extraneous noise. People barkers on the carousel in the midway, the guys that are trying to get you to come over and do their kind of thing, they use that sound because there's a cacophony of sound surrounding them, and if they don't find that sound in their voice, no one will come to buy their product. Radio announcers, particularly people who are selling things, develop this ability, because if they don't, then people won't pay attention to them. Can you see why square dance callers might want to have that sound in their voice? It's a very easy thing to do. I'm going to give you each an opportunity to do that, and then are we about out of time? Tell me. Okay, so I'm going to ask you, I'm going to demonstrate 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. No, sorry, that wasn't the same but dynamic. Here's primal sound. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And if I take that muted sound and try to make it as loud and as carrying as the primal sound, I get this. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. How many of you, in particularly callers who are coaches, hear people overproducing their voices? This kind of sound instead of that kind of a sound. And do you know how to do it? Yes, you do. So I'm not going to tell you yet, but if somebody wants to find out afterwards, I'll talk to you. But you'll know how to do it. You have permission to do it. So count to 5 in primal sound.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
Nope, that had no primal in it. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
What he heard was the lowness in my voice. And so he went that direction. It wasn't the lowness in my voice that did it. It's actually a very high upper frequency that makes the voice, here's the pitch that I'm speaking at. Here's that primal quality, that upper frequency overtone. And the further apart the upper frequency overtone is from the pitch that I'm actually speaking at, the deeper and richer my voice will sound. So it doesn't matter whether I'm a bass or a baritone or a tenor, that quality will make my voice have luster and richness to it because of the depth of the sound in the overtone series. So this is the sound This is without it.
This is the sound. This is without it.
You got it. Count to 5.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
That has no primal sound in it. Now put it in.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1, 2, 1, 2.
I'm going to do it and you match me.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
You got it. And you don't know exactly how you did that, do you? But you were born to do that. Say that again.
An element of threateningness, I think. 1.
Well, no, and that's often what is resorted to. It's actually a very calming sound. And it's something that is very, very reassuring. When you get that primal quality in your voice, people feel reassured. So here you go.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
You have it on 2, 4, and 5. Try it again.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
You got it. Good.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
It was especially effective on 3, 4, and 5.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
That's right on.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
Good.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
That's right.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
All of you are now keying, and you remember the first several were like, I'm not sure what I'm doing. And then as soon as you figured out what the sonority was, I never talked to you anything about how to do it. But bing, 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 bing in a row, now people are sort of picking up. And it is nothing more than giving yourself permission to make that kind of a sound.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
Right on. Okay, I'm going to have to pass the microphone because I can't walk past you. But I want to have each one of you do it, and I want it on the tape so that you can hear it. And then I will coach as I can.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
3, 4, and 5 had it. 1 and 2 did not. Did you try it again?
1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
Got it there in every place except for
1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
See, I got a lower voice than she does. But it's not the pitch of my voice, it's the sonority of my voice that she's going to you're saying
3. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
you were very successful in it. You'll notice that as she did so, her voice sounded richer. Okay, here's the next.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
Let's put a vowel in that.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
3, 4, and 5. Really good. Try 1 and 2
1,
one more.
2, 3, 4, 5.
Good.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
3, 4, and 5 had it. 1 and 2 didn't.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
You notice that all I say is 1 and 2 don't have it, and the second time up it always works. You already know how to do it. Has anybody figured out how you do it? Do you want to know how? No, actually you don't put it further back, but that's what it feels like. Something opens up back there, doesn't it? Okay, I'm going to turn the microphone off and tell you the answer.